Okay, you've got it. Right. So it's 6:02. Apologies for starting a little bit after 6 o'clock. I am Renata Chakasang, the CEO of the Women and Gender Equality Commission. And today marks the restart of our regular virtual panel discussions on topics of interest to the commission and the wider audience. For those of you who don't know, the Women and Gender Equality Commission has been in existence since 2009. It has a commission made up of 15 commissioners with representation from the Ethnic Relations Commission, the Rights of the Child Commission, and the Indigenous Peoples Commission. And it sits within Guyana's human rights machinery. And if all goes well this year, I think we should finally have our Human Rights Commission established. So the Women and Equality Commission is concerned with issues related to women's the empowerment of women, the upholding of human rights, and definitely the achievement of gender equality. And this evening, we'd like to focus on the creative industries. I guess we should say the creative and cultural industries. This is February, and in Guyana, it's a very creative month because we celebrate our becoming a republic with a Mashramani celebrations that happen, I think, next Thursday with the road parade. I'll get right into it. The creative and cultural industries refers to various businesses that produce and market products that belong categorically to the creative arts. Such products should include clothing, decorative materials for homes, books, movies, television programs, music, craft, fine art pieces, etc. And certainly these reside within the realm of intellectual property rights. So that is something that we'd like to consider as well this evening. In 2005, Guyana became a state party to the UNESCO Convention for the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. And it means that since 2005, at least, we've seriously considered what our cultural industry should look like. The cultural industries, of course, is one of the fastest growing industries in the world, providing decent work, especially for women and youth and vulnerable groups. And it should be noted that a large number of women tend to work in the cultural industries, particularly in craft production. The development of these industries should positively aid in the advancement of women's entrepreneurship and should promote a gender balance and equity. Enterprises such as the craft sector should inject long-term growth for marginalized populations, such as women and youth. And as such, what we'd like to discuss this evening is how we can move it from where it is right now to really a position whereby particularly women can benefit in such a way that they really are empowered through this particular sector. So my question to the panelists this evening, first question, would be, given the fact that Guyana has discovered the oil in the quantities that it has discovered, how important is the cultural and creative sector to us in Guyana? Who wants to go first?
Should I say, can you hear me?
You got the mic off first.
Can you hear me?
Not hearing you.
I'm hearing her.
Right, I've been having some problems with my my mic. So I have
Okay, but
two
we can hear you
different
now.
devices. So you can hear me now. You see me on one thing, hear me on another thing. So good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me to speak about this particular thing, which I have been kind of divorced from for a couple of years, not willingly. But I think the question of how important the creative industries are, it really does not only pertain to anything to do with oil and gas. So I don't want us to start there, if I could be disruptive at this moment. But I want to talk about what it means to us as people generally outside of all of this conversation that is current. I think that we've always had these abilities and a very rich cultural heritage to draw upon in our country. People forget, for instance, that the first person to be published out of this region was Mittelhauser. The first person to get a recording contract out of this region was our own BG Baji, Bill Rogers, right? We had a major, film industry at one point with Mr. Lee of With Wishes Over Horses, going back to all of the work that has been done on Guyana. So this is something completely out of this moment that we've had, but the question has always been how to professionalize these industries, how to make them systematic, sustainable, inclusive, and how to also at the same time not cheapen them and popularize them, but also to find a way, a synergistic mix between the need to monetize them and preserve them in their right, in their proper form, and also to make sure that you protect them from others who usually see the value of what we have much better than we ever do. So I think they're important. They're important because anything we know about any civilization in the past, so all this archaeological work is happening around the world, we know from their artifacts, right, what their creatives did, the paintings, the scribes, their pottery, etc. Right? So very important. And in this particular moment, I think that the question you wanted to get to was how, in an expanding economy that is fueled in part, only in part, by this particular industry, where we have gold. I keep reminding people we have gold, we have rare earths, we have other things. And I don't want that to be out of the conversation, because then a big revenue stream is being left out of the conversation. I don't want that to happen. But so we have these possibilities of a lot of people flooding into the country as consumers, but also a lot of people flooding into the country as co-creators of cultural industries and as partners. So it becomes important. The industry can expand around these areas, and in this way, as far as I can see. And then you have some other avenues that could open up, because once you deepen the ports outside, you can have, cruise ships coming, and that's a whole different other thing. But we have our beautiful ecotourism products that have embedded in them their own cultural mores, their artifact, their heritage, and so on. That is a special thing for Guyana that we've not, I don't know, exploited or used to the advantage of everybody yet, or those persons in those communities. So there's a lot that Guyana has to offer in terms of all the creative industries. And I'm glad, Renata, that you included in your opening that it's not only about the performative, because when people think about the arts and creative industries, they only think about, the performative aspects, so theater, music, dance, etc. But it involves designing, it involves literature, it involves video, advertising, even those kinds of products are also in there. So it is big, and it is, in fact, it earns more possibly worldwide than the particular industries that we're talking about so much this at this time, and they are much more sustainable because they're not exhaustible. I'll stop there.
Okay. Jocelyn, you'd like to jump in?
Sure. I should have thought of it. All right. Hi, hi, Paloma. Thanks, Renata. Are we just speaking to ourselves? How many participants are there? Not many,
We've got
I
six
don't look, I don't
others.
see.
right?
that I
Anyhow,
can-
be that as it may.
But you're recording, aren't you?
We are recording.
Okay, so yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that Paloma put a semicolon on the idea that oil and gas is what is going to fuel or is the impetus at the present moment. This is not an new conversation. This is an old conversation in Guyana. And it is a conversation that needs to be deepened in many ways. I think the one significant difference there is with this new economy is that we can think of a locally based market for products of all kinds, intellectual, creative, and certainly from in the idea of craft and things that are supportive of craft work. So this is to me an immediate fillip for this all industries, but for this industry in particular, because you're going to have a lot more places of entertainment, obviously, because you have now a more well, a greater population with more disposable income in some parts, but it's also the clear and obvious divide that is growing means that for me to bring the creative industries and women's role in that into their rightful place will require a lot more than anecdotal data. So I would like to suggest that the first thing the Commission and others could do is we really need to do a survey of what is and who is involved in it and what are their opportunities, but more importantly, what are the current constraints. But we know many of these constraints are that you don't have predictable income, you don't have a lot of facilities, recording studios, access to equipment, ready access to training, ready access to, for instance, delivering to a more wider and popular audience through television and so on. And therefore, there are many things that are being done. There are some signs when you have those up markets and those craft markets and farmers markets that are about, but they're, they're a particularly small, I would say, niche of people. And I think it is mostly Georgetown based in a particular class and a particular area. If we really want to take advantage of this widening economic space that can afford us an internal market, it means that for me, there are important things that have to be done. First of all, we need to find out who is doing what where. What are the things that we are particularly good at that we can build on? What is it that people across different classes, ethnicities, and age groups are interested in doing and have some capacity to do? Where are the gaps in that? We need training. We want to have to look at, for me, the programs that are going on in schools. Are they promoting creativity, or are they in fact reducing it in this kind of very rote way in which everything is done? So what is it that creativity demands at an early level in development to really engender this process from as they would say, womb to tomb, so that we could begin to not, I think that we have become a pretty stereotyped in some ways, and we are importing a lot of what we think are popular forms of everything. And so that you have to create that space by identifying where are the roadblocks, I think, to that? And there are many, I would like to suggest, not least lack of financial assistance and an enabling environment in its totality. You know, where if you wanted to learn a craft, can you just simply go somewhere and learn to do something? You know, can you get master classes? Are there trainers? Where are they located? How are people going to get there? And how are women, in particular, going to be able to afford in every sense, time-wise and financially, these opportunities, even if they do exist, right? So this, to me, it requires a whole rethink or a new think, even if it's not a rethink, of what it is that we are aiming for. What is the possibility of using this money that is seems to be only going into mortar and board, that we can use it for creating what is, to me, sadly lacking in terms of conversation or even plans that you hear. I mean, I think the Ministry of Culture, what is it they're doing? You know, what is being done? You spoke about MASH. What is being done about MASH? You see the pathetic state, for instance, of you know, any street activity. You know, whether it's you know, prior to Mashramani or any of those things, what is it we are promoting in terms of a popular reception for any of these things? We talk about carnival. I don't see any sign of creativity for costumes, tents that were being done at all levels, not just putting together some things. I mean, this was what made Trinidad's carnival particularly significant. Now a lot of costumes, I gather, are coming from China. Maybe COVID has put a stop to that. But the point is, unless these things are enabled and encouraged, and small things develop into large things. So somebody who is making a wing for costume begins to think about making things in a certain kind of way, and is informed about that. I can speak ad nauseum of how this feeds into my own slice of this, which is not strictly speaking creative, but is in fact very creative, and that is the making of furniture from our raw materials. Every aspect of it demands creativity, and that starts with design. You know, you have to have design, you have to have the craft of making things that are not just machine, but maybe machine assisted, but are principally handmade pieces, products. So that all of that is, to me, part of what is the creative industry. How does that translate from what is done in the indigenous communities with their weaving? What is it that we know should exist if we care to go backwards to the different creative memories in our Indian, African, Chinese, and so population? And how does that is there a marriage of something that creates, as I believe and have shown, that exists if we use design as the center of this, you know? And but all of this, of course, is all well and good, but we need markets. People need to be able to sell products. So in my view, one of the things they always chat about local content is that every single building that is being erected here that has to do with this industry that is draining so many resources, literally and figuratively, is that how is it you pump, not drill, but pump some resources into the training of people and the creating a predictable market for goods. One of the ways in which this can be done, I think, is that you make a legislative arrangement that says that everything that is built here that emanates from this money or for this money should spend X% on locally created items. So whether that is curtains, blinds, chairs, tables, glasses, glassrest, objects of art, and so on. But you have to get the kind of lift you need and quickly, is you would have to have some legislative framework, I believe, that I would hope that the trade bodies are going to be persuaded that the things that we need local content or is not only how much cement you could give or whatever, but that there is really a very urgent need, if we're going to have an inclusive economy, for there to be designs of structures and policies that are going to enable this. So the whole enabling environment. I mean, I spelled it out a little bit because I think for most people, you think, well, okay, you could have this, you could find a market. That's not so easy, given how easy it is to import everything at a cheaper cost made somewhere else. So I would say that to me should be a foundation of how it is we create centers to train people at all levels, whether it's welders, artists, fine artists, people who are doing embroidery, people who are making clothing, people who are weaving materials, the whole bandwidth. And we could sit down about that. But I think if I would urge the Women's Commission to do anything, is perhaps to begin to do a survey. And it could be the kind of survey that people can offer. You don't have to send out people. You put out a big thing and ask people to just writing if they're making anything, whether it's food or otherwise, because all this data will be relevant to something, So I think that there's a way to promote that.
In 2020, actually, the CDB commissioned a study on the craft, I guess, landscape in Guyana. And this was in preparation for something they're calling Create Caribbean, which is a $3 million fund that's the money is put up by the EU. And it's being rolled out in collaboration with UNESCO, CARICOM, and UWI. I wanted to put some a bit of, I guess, global context in terms of the money or the numbers for the cultural industries. Paloma talked about it a little bit, but the hard numbers are, and this is from UNESCO, 48.1% of the workers in the cultural and creative sector are women. The 50 million jobs are created by this sector, and that represents 6.2% of employment globally. $389 billion, this is US, was generated by the export of cultural goods in 2019. And that really rolled out to mean that was a 3.1% increase over 2015's numbers. Now, subsequent to that, we had a pandemic. So we're now have to rebuild that market and rebuild that trajectory. But it is expected that the cultural and creative industries would be one of the fastest growing industries in the world. And it would, of course, provide decent work, especially for women. In Guyana, we have something called the Small Business Act. And as part of that act, it says 20% of all government procurement must come from small businesses. And within those small businesses would reside craft industries and creative industries. And going to your point, whereby all of that could probably form the backbone explore the local content, tweaking of the legislation so that the new buildings that are happening, the furnishing of these offices and residences should contain, as you said, locally made, handmade products that come from Guyana, come from the hands of Guyanese. And a lot of those hands, we hope, would be women. And it really needs for us to be put together a framework in such a way that we do create the environment for predictable markets. Well, the other question I wanted to say is in terms of it says culture and creativity should be the heartbeat of our society. I know I opened up the conversation by saying in the new dispensation of oil economy, do we feel that sufficient attention is going to be paid towards industries that don't involve the extractive industries? Or sorry, are not focused on the extractive industries? And it's how do we create that environment where those industries that are outside of the extractive industries get their fair share of the pie, as it were? How do we, what sorts of things do we put? And Jocelyn talked about ensuring that there are training facilities available, that people can be given the space to be creative, that design becomes once more an important aspect of life in Guyana. So as head of Guyana's premier learning institution, Paloma, how do we meld? This is not only the academic and the esoteric, but really the nuts and bolts, the makers, the hands of people. How do we make them work in such a way that they create a livelihood for themselves that is desirable by them?
Right. So there's quite a lot wrapped up in that. And I just want to say that there's been a good bit of work that has gone on, academic work and industry work. And I'd like to point us to some of those. So for instance, a couple of years ago, the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, for some reason, had gotten very, very interested and involved in the cultural industries and had done a number of studies and brought in a number of trainers. Just the last couple of years, IDB has gotten involved. In fact, they just published a report on a dialogue, a very, very comprehensive report and dialogue about creative industries in the Caribbean. I, through CARICOM, had done a bit of work in around 2012, 2014, when I was not DVC yet, across the Caribbean on professionalizing young people. 14 countries I had visited, and in fact, persons like Chronics and so on were just in their infancy. So I was able to sit with them and talk to them about how they were actually marketing themselves, and kind of this idea of the backpack creative, where you're not traveling with a big entourage anymore. You're kind of bringing all the costs down so that you could be more mobile and all that. And all of this was pre-Zoomology, pre-COVID, when now this is a whole dimension of technology and cross-border collaboration and so on. But there are a couple of things that all of these reports, my personal work, my own engagement as an artist and with artists in the region, in Guyana, shows up. So the first one, and many of them, Justin talked about. First thing is data. What do we really know about all of these, sectors? And there are many of them. What do we know about them in hard detail about our own country and the regions? Secondly, access to capital. This is a big, big, big thing across the world, across the region, because many times what artists and creatives sell are ideas. They sell ideas, and ideas are intangibles, right? And so the ability to fund something that is somebody's idea by many banks, commercial banks and entities is just not in their kind of scope. That risk is too great for them. So we have to be able to create special funds that understand that a creative is a process, and creative industries are processes. And that we have to put a supporting and enabling environment around them, and to teach them sometimes how to be entrepreneurial. One of the things that we see happen with artists many times, and it's something that personally infuriates me, is that you ask them, what's the cost of this thing, this painting or sculpture? And they say, give me whatever. And that is something that breaks my heart and upsets me at the same time. Because it's like, how many hours did you take to do this thing? What is the cost of the paint? What is the, so we have to be able to teach them to be entrepreneurial, and if it is that they call a price and they really want to be competitive, and you can't pay the price, how to negotiate a better price. But don't start by saying, give me anything you want, and or what you think you should give me and all of that. So this training about this, and then also to understand that, like every other business, there's a science to this, a lot of science. So everybody's talking about innovation, resilience, but creativity is at the center of all of this. And there's a lot of scientific work about how creative brains work, how their perspectives, their cognitive abilities, if their structure is different, all kinds of things, to try to understand how it is that the creative ability could be engendered in persons, because a lot of what drives business is innovation, right? And that aspect of it is something that we also need to do work on. So the university is doing work on this. Right now, we do have a special school that we just launched, an early childhood center for excellence in education. We take children from 3 months to 7 years old, and their curriculum is a special curriculum. We also have a thing called the Razor Camp, where we have 100 gifted children who come from the regions that camp with us. And this is a science camp, by the way. It's a science camp, but the way in which we're teaching science and accelerating them, it involves a lot of creative, innovative approaches. So how do they apply their abilities to see things and to make something out of something else? How do they problem solve around using these faculties? And a lot of creativity is about problem solving. A lot of it is about problem solving, and people don't see it that way. And so the other thing is about training that Justin talked about. So right now, as you know, we had under a different vice chancellor a couple of years ago started this artist in residence program, which I really struggled to get funding for, because people did not see at first why we needed to do this. They saw it as an indulgence, an extravagance, or something. But it was not. It was really for reasons. You had some master artists coming out of this country and on many other parts of the region. Many of them we could not sustain them in Guyana because they couldn't get materials, they couldn't get people to buy there. So they would have left, and they were doing what they do at the top of their game. We needed to be able to, first of all, document their journey, document their technique, their process, to get their advice, to get them before they passed away on record, so that students doing things at CAPE, for instance, and CXC, which did not exist when I was a child. Maybe I would have had a different life. But those things are on the curriculum now of schools. But many students don't choose them. The parents don't allow them. It's like a tack on kind of thing. So we have to be able to change the perspective of persons to understand that you can do very, very much with a qualification in the creative industries, because you can do all kinds of things, right? All kinds of things. And it's a sought after ability that many people still have not found how to unlock. I'm not sure that everybody has it, but that's something that could be debatable. And the other one has to do with competitiveness. So what are we talking about in terms of passing on what we know or what are people who are able to do these things, and what are we doing to document it? But what are we doing to protect it? So a lot about the international distribution and marketing of our products has to come back to this question of intellectual and copy and property rights, right? Which we still as a country are challenged to enact in any kind of way. And so when you open up a country like this to all these influences, and not when I say you, I don't mean anybody particular has done it, but the country is open because you have people on social media doing all kinds of things, showing people their recipes, showing them inside their house, showing them how to knit, how to cornrow people's hair, the amount of things that people are doing online, and they don't recognize that somebody is out there having a very careful look at this. And I'm not saying they shouldn't do it. If they want to do it, they do it. But somebody's finding a way to monetize this, right? And it's coming from us, and we're not thinking about this. If you don't care about it, that's okay. So one of the things that the university also has done is we have this entrepreneurial school, School for Entrepreneurship and Business, SEBI, that is also working with creatives, not only people who are building things and so on, but those who want to build businesses and industries. And one of the things that's happening in this school is because you have people with very good business, training and acumen and sense, but people also come in with these ideas, but they don't know how to put it together. They are coming together, and that's what you need, the synergy between those who will manage, who can market, who can deal with the distribution, and those who can create. We also have been working with several other agencies partnering. So for instance, we run an Avasant IDB UG project, a digital skills project with the Caribbean School of Data Management. And one of the things that the Avasant program in particular does is takes students from across the country. They graduated about 320 in the last 2.5 years. Every 6 months they have a graduation, and they put them with entrepreneurship skills. So Dr. Kevin Peer from School of Business, the people from our school for computing here at the university, and then also others from other technical skills. So do you have a business idea? How do you use technology to market? How do you as a person present your proposals, write them? And what is the entrepreneurship side? So we're working like that. And of course, within the university, you'll see, coming back to the Artists in Residence program, not only are we using that to document what artists are doing or master artists are doing, we're also opening them up to students to talk to teach, to lecture, taking them around the country once we have the budget and once their discipline allows it. And also in certain cases, they're performing and speaking. So for right now, we have Henry Mutu, who was knighted for his work in the theater as a scenic designer, a director, who was here since January for 3 months as our artist in residence this year. And he is working with the Theatre Guild of Guyana, who we just created an MOU with, well, not just last year, so that the Guild people and the UG people in our art department, in our theater department, and schools teaching this, they're all coming together. So for this weekend, he has a workshop on lighting for theater, lighting design for theater. Next weekend, he has one for scenic design. And we've invited, everybody in, teachers, people from UG, people from the National Drama School from around the country. And then he has a talk about his own work as a creative and his book. And then the last thing he's doing in this round is he's directing 2 plays. One of them is Ian MacDonald's 1960-something Tramping Man. He's directing at the Theatre Guild, so that opens in April. So in that one person, you get so much value out of them, out of this one tour. And that does not count for all of the work that he's doing when he goes to productions, speaking to artists about acting, speaking to students and so on. So there's that happening. Years ago, we had Keith Waite doing the same for music, and of course, Dave Martin doing the same for music. And a painter. Next person is likely to be our Stanley Greaves, who we're trying to negotiate the cost to get him in. So it's wide open. But in terms of studying what art is, of course, the university does have a limping
arts
program
program.
because one vice chancellor before me had actually wanted to close the art department, that section of the Faculty of Education and Humanities down. And we had a massive falling out over it, myself and he and others, not the one that was preceding me directly, because he started the art and he did the opposite. So I just want to be clear. Another one. And the reason was that it was not something that was making money. The university was having problems with financing, and it seemed to be the easiest prey to and the easiest thing to cut, right? Because you don't have huge amounts of students, because you can't teach somebody to sing or to dance or to paint with 100 students in a class. Just as not that can't work. That model can't work, right? So it is something that is resource intensive and so on. But we have been able to produce exhibitions. I'm very proud that 3 of our students won top prizes in the Guyana Prize this last one here. So Rhea Wilshire, Gabriella Mohammed, who's the other one? I'm forgetting. Oh, the young man he's the head of the astronomy department, Mr. Mohammed. Won the youth prize, both of them. He's a physicist, but that's what he's writing. So there's a lot to unpack here. And finally, and I must say this just to the memories of Henry Rodney and Derry Atkins, who sat with me on this committee a couple of years ago, we did a couple of things as a university in collaboration with the Ministry of Culture at that point, and UNESCO and several other persons. We did 2 very significant things, which are being, I hope, continued. I can't speak to it because I'm not plugged in at this moment on some of these things, so I don't want to be unfair and irresponsible, but I want to say that they're there. One was a grant was allocated for supporting creative industries and production. And I worked with those persons and the now Department of Culture's head, the Director of Culture, Miss
Boswain.
Miss Boswain, yes, Miss Boswain, myself, Derry Atkins, who's passed away, Henry Rodney, who's passed away, on creating the parameters for that first competition. And what it was supposed to do was to fund the production, the pilot productions of items that people wanted to create. And the second step was going to be, because I was very concerned about the ability of people to manage money and that they must actually bring the products, right? The second step of that should be to help them now to market it. Once you have the prototype, you've worked it out, you now work on the distribution and marketing, which Guyana is ripe for. I don't know if that was ever done, but I know the first part was done, and we did award 20 persons at the time. I noticed some were done recently as well. But the next part is to help them with the entrepreneurial side. So that's on the creative industry side. But more importantly, coming back to the point you're talking about with regard to oil money, when this whole question of, the management of the Guyana Prize and creative industries and so on was very, very much on the public agenda in a very, very kind of negative way, which I can't deal with. I deal with this kind of way in which we express problems. We can't say, oh, here is a problem, how do we fix it? We have to do all kinds of things, bash everybody in the process. And that's not the way that I want to function and the way the university will function. So what we did, we said, look, obviously there's something going on here. How do we understand it? And so we started a process. We sent out a questionnaire to everybody who was an artist inside Guyana who had won the prize out everywhere. They couldn't come. We had that list. And then we called, and I'll never forget the date. It was November the 5th. It was a Diwali day. And people said, oh, nobody's going to come to this workshop, this conversation. Every one of them showed up that we know. And some of them have passed away now. And we had this to Bonita Bowen, what's her name again? Harris. She was also one of the facilitators for us as well that day. And we sat down and talked about the creative industries. And what came out of that was a project proposal. And in the final analysis, we thought, let's push, how are we going to fund this thing? And we thought, let's push the envelope. And so we did what we call a motion, a resolution to go to the minister. And it went to the minister. It was George Norton at the time. I don't know how far he got with it because it was in 2019, around November. But this resolution was that for 0.01% of the oil revenues, or what we call the revenues from the Natural Resources Fund, should have gone into not only funding, structuring this, but training at a structural institutional level, but also to the preservation of indigenous knowledges and practices. Because when you have this kind of influx in a country that's happening now, what could easily happen is that you really lose a lot of those things. So the preservation and documentation and so on was also part of that. And that was a whole big project. I wrote it for the committee, for the people. The university that was our response to try to see if we could put some sense into what was, playing out in a very negative, unproductive way in the public domain. And I don't know what has happened with that. And that is something that's still there. The university is still very much interested in supporting this. And as the biggest trainer in the country, bar none, of young adults, right? We have 75% of our students are below the age of 29. So we have a large number of young people in the university who are who are multifaceted and who want to work on entrepreneurship things. They want to create, they want to innovate, they're creative in themselves, but we have to be able to help them. So the enabling environment for the creative arts, we've just put a structural policy in place just last week, Friday, which I can't speak about in public, but to take some funds and put not only into the creative arts, but in sports as well, the creative industries, but in sports as well, because I think they're hugely neglected. And this is a part of university life. You don't only come into a university to bun the books or box the books, as they say. You come into a university for an experience that shapes you, that makes you more human, hopefully, than when you came in. And I'm going to stop there because I realize other people have to speak.
There's one question I wanted to ask you, and you can sort of meditate on it for a bit before coming back. And that is, I know a lot of research happens. A lot of students do their final year projects, and they come up with interesting ideas, and particularly in the Faculty of Technology. And so the question is, how would the university go about creating or being able to turn those ideas into some sort of commercial success? Universities like Oxford, I think, have been very successful in doing that. And I'm glad you've been able to access some funds. And this is something that we'd like to see, that link between the research that's homegrown research that's happening, and to be able to turn those products or ideas, maybe with some other inputs, into something that is commercial, and that the university can probably take some sort of benefit from, if not, not the whole pie, but at least maybe 0.01% of the next greatest invention in Guyana. But
I can speak to that. I can speak to that, and I'd like to speak to that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Because I'm actually working off of two machines. One, the sound is not working. The other one is yeah. So anyway, but I'm being creative here about this.
Yes.
But that's a really important point you're making. So let me start from our pride and joy. These 4 young men who won the Webby Award last year for their invention. These are all UG students from that department. And so that's a one-off thing. So technically speaking, nobody wanted to fund them because people didn't think they could win. And when I funded them just so I thought they could go and have the experience. So when they won, it was marvelous because it shows what you can do with just a small push, right? And giving people an opportunity. But we have 3 really important entities inside the university now that are specifically dedicated to scaling up and capturing research, bringing it to market, dealing with intellectual copyright and patenting and all of those things. And so let me speak about those really quickly. So one of them is this institute called UG-IRE, but it's the Institute for Research, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship. It's different from the business school, which is training. This institute, which is run by Professor Patsy Francis, takes the research, the applied research of students and staff, and works on patenting, works on scaling up, works on bringing funds to them to market. And they had a beautiful exhibition, the first exhibition, because it's a new institute. It's only 3 years old this year. So last year they had a beautiful exhibition of, I think, 40 or 50 innovative inventions from UG at the National Library, which was phenomenal. The website should be up at UG Science, so you can actually see what those were. But there were over 100 different research projects. Some could not come to the public domain because they need to be protected at this point in time. Some we just didn't have the space for. They're doing this again this year. And they have an entrepreneurship side as well that they work with SETI. We also have the Office for Undergraduate Research, which was started by my predecessor. And that one is one that links our undergraduate research students with research projects all across the world at that level of undergraduate research. But I think the thing that I am most excited about at this moment is this thing called UG Red. And UG Red is brand new. UG Red is literally about a day or two old. It's taken us 2 years to develop. And this is probably the first time it's going to be spoken of in public because of that. But it's called the Research Enterprise and Development. So RED, R-E-D. And what is this doing? This is doing precisely this, bringing all of these assets that the university has. It's creative and intellectual assets. It's services that it provides, and its ability to strike out and look for funding on its own into one managed, directed unit. So we're not asking academics to do this. The academics can contribute, but this is our business arm that is looking to bring all of this innovation. And the research side in particular is very special because the innovative research that's being done inside the university itself, but university with international partners, is something that has been a well-kept secret for a long time and just stops at a certain point because you don't have the scope of funding to kind of scale up some of these things they're doing, right? You talk about innovations and so on, some of the things that are happening inside the university. For instance, they're looking at research about why parrots talk, right? They had this parroting symposium the other day with parrots from all over the region, all over the Amazon region. That kind of work, but also work on materials, what kinds of materials that you can use to print a house, for instance, that's going to stand up here, genetic work, and all of those kinds of innovative things, including things to do with space, right? Building things and looking at the cosmos, all those kinds of things happening inside this little university. But we have not been able, but we've just not focused in the past on putting those together with financing, with strategic planning, with marketing, and with branding. And so that is, and we have UG Press, by the way. We do have the UG Press. The UG Press is back up and running. So for publications, not only of artistic things, but we've published so far, we haven't published any artistic things so far. We've published the academic stuff so far in the last 2 or 3 years, but with a long list of publications people are submitting. So that is also going to help to get things out as well. The press does not make money. It hasn't made money yet, but it's one of those things that's really important because you have to be able to document, really document and allow others to be able to learn from what you're doing, and to put out there what is really belongs to the world, really, in a certain sense. So, yeah.
Thank you. So Jocelyn, I know a couple of years ago you went on visiting the interior, and I think one of those the outcomes of that was the Rupununi Essence project, where we took things that were done in indigenous communities and made it into a commercial product that's been very successful. Could you speak a little bit more about that experience?
You're at the wrong, right, keep it wrong. I had nothing to do with that. That's
good
bad.
though.
I
Good.
think, but I could talk about things that many years ago. I, at Leanna Kane, worked with the YY community. Let's, for instance, I was working with designers, Patty Johnson from Canada, and we were trying to develop products. Let me just give you a quick thing. And what we did was we brought the YY out, you know, the weaving is done by the men. And the oldest weaver was probably in his 70s. His name was Shushu. He was just amazing. And we worked on creating some products. And we did 2 shows, one in New York at the ICFF called the North-South Project, which was Northern designers and Southern producers and skills. And then we did one, there was a wider one called Caribbean Expo in Canada. And our show, which was funded by, at the time, the USA GTIS program, because, you know, those booths are very expensive, and that's something else we could talk about, is we won a prize, you know. This is one of the biggest international furniture shows in the world, the International Contemporary Furniture Show in New York. And it just goes to show you that with a little bit of input, which was costly in Ghana dollars, because the booths are expensive, the designer had to be brought up and down and paid. But it was a partnership with the USA, the GTIS, and the other one was with Export Canada. So, which had people like Nicholas Young, Irene Bacchus, there were some people doing leather, Sean Carrington, and various things. And we tried to marry products with Guyana, you know, Barbados, the Dominic, and so on. And they had this great show. And so going back to Paloma's point about, you know, the whole way in which we can take some kind of synergy really from the Caribbean. I mean, why aren't Trinidad Mask people not here working with our people and at more popular levels? Or I mean, why is everything has to be so separate, in my view, for years? So I think that, you know, it all comes back, as she was suggesting, to how much money you could throw at this. The resources are there, the human resources are there. You could organize master classes. I think the demand is there. And therefore, it seems to me that this isn't something we should be going around begging for money for. With all this money that's being tossed around, all these generous regulatory things like duty-free and so on, these things need to be directed at a central level at this industry. And I think that if it's not, as it doesn't seem to be, central to the budget and all and the financial arrangements, then we have to make it so. And that seems to me there should be an endowment fund, a trust fund, you know, where companies can perhaps get some tax benefit if they put money into this tax fund, this endowment fund or trust fund for the arts. This is what has helped all over the world. And as we could see, you know, you spoke about the pandemic. Look at what that revealed the world over. When people couldn't go to things, how many people were out of work, how much money was lost from the general economies, you know, and therefore we don't need, you know, more data in that sense to say why it is important to really enable this industry. And that, you know, the idea that industry is only, you know, concrete and board and, you know, machines and so on, is so backward that we have to really create what I would say, a sensitivity and a sensibility around this, the need for us to do this. All of this resentment that is around us about how divided the economy is becoming, some of that can be mitigated, I think, if there's a concerted effort to put resources where they are so badly needed. I mean, Paloma is talking about training people. Well, I worked on some training program once done by a group that was working on HIV/AIDS from, and the Chickatelli was the company. She chose to take the part of their own profits or her private money to work with people who had or HIV/AIDS. And it was amazing what it produced. We did work with weaving, upholstery, which I did in the factory. We did fabric painting. They did yoga so that they could learn, people could see themselves not just as engines of something, but in their human self and how it is you could develop that. And in the end, created for everyone who came to be trained, they were paid a stipend. And then, surprising to them, they were given at the end of the program, we had, for every day that you went, money was put aside on your behalf. So at the end of it all, some people got as much as $75,000. Karen Boyle was very involved in it. She was in charge for them to use as a seed money to borrow money with an arrangement made with IPED. It was transformative. It is the same story of Red Thread in the early days. That if you provide people with the wherewithal to express their skills, to learn new skills, to validate their experiences and their hopes and dreams, then amazing things can happen. Now, I mean, this is, so well known and documented that we shouldn't have to persuade any government that this is an important area for investment. They like to talk about human capital. Well, like everything else, human capital requires some inputs. So I think that I would urge you as the women's program maybe to set up a consortium of people who could work on developing, whether it is a kind of paper that can be used as the basis for how it is, what section, proportion of our economic good could be used for the creation of skills and that enabling environment that we've all, both Paloma and I, and you yourself have spoken about, that is so badly needed to uplift. I'll give you an example. I had once suggested that, look, what is the thing about Guyana that we claim is attractive? Is it not our foods? Easy?
Yes.
Right. I had said, well, look, we will design a kitchen at Lianakean and work with people who were doing pottery and other things, woodworking, and we would create a studio with, a real modern kind of studio and have people cook, that these could be projects on TV, right? I think the Singing Chef, me and John did some of it, but these things need to be done in a more sustained manner with more support. Now imagine how important and how uplifting it would be if somebody who really made the best bakes was invited on a show, or the best roti, or a good pepper pot and a good curry. I mean, that is so empowering. That whole duck curry competition, for instance, really validated something that is so part of our existence.
This is true. I mean, recently we had the inaugural Pepper Pot Festival.
Yeah.
And one of the things years ago that was discussed, because it really never came into fruition when I was at the Tourism Association, was Canal Number One was known as the place for the best pineapples. And we thought it would be good to do a festival, a pineapple festival there. Where you'd make all kinds of products, you'd have the competitions with respect to who made the best pine tarts, the best pine drink, the best pine whatever. And actually who had the best tasting pine. And that would form part of our tourism product. So because we're looking for alternatives, not alternatives, but things to do in addition to going to Kaitour and going to Durupumuni. And that there are other communities that could benefit from having tourism dollars injected. And those particularly communities that we thought about were those that were involved in agricultural pursuits. So with that community, Canal Number One was looked at, and then also the community around Mainstay. They also did that. And then also things like cassava and so forth. So these are things that can be looked at. And they form part of our cultural industries. Us looking at what we do, the things that we do, which is what this culture, and learning how to make sure that we can show off, create very well what it is that we do, but also document it. And I'm happy to hear that the university is looking in at how to patent things. Because like I said, our society is wide open right now, and people are literally crowdsourcing content, including cultural content, and then appropriating it.
Let me tell you, well, I want to say first thing, I want to ask Paloma if Guyana has signed on to the TRIPS. You know, we had never as a country signed on to the full agreement. So whilst we could patent, I don't think that we could have registered on the intellectual property rights, which was some of the big arguments made by like, you know, musicians, Eddie Grant in particular, that Guyana had no, we have not signed on to those conventions. So I would be curious to ask Paloma whether we've closed that gap. Because the patents are one thing, but there are other things that have to be done. For instance, I could tell you that I know somebody who's Guyanese, who was creating clothing and in the United States. And next thing they know, and they're doing quite well, African-based clothing, is that a Chinese company and not only registered it for trademark and patent, but used her very name. And you know, this idea that if your name alone, you would think could not be ripped off. But you know, all you do is do a little kind of, you know, let's say you're, you know, Chakasang, and they call it El Chakasang, and it's just small differences allow those patents, and to fight that is costly. So the registration of patents and intellectual property needs to be done, you know, in the first instance. El Dorado had to be bought back. Demerara sugar is a good example, made in Mauritius. So, you know, if the products that we have or that we should have geographical recognition for, and all of that needs to be cleaned up. I mean, Neville Totaram at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was very well versed in this. I don't know where he is located now, but these are things that should not be, you know, after the fact. We should have, these offices should be available, advice should be available, design for logos and things. There should be help for all of those. We should have an office that helps to facilitate the registration of those things. It's easy to register a business name, but a lot of people don't actually know that. So I think not only do you need for the university, which is good to do, but at all levels, we need to do an outreach to the Ministry of Trade, you know, Made in Guyana label. There used to be a Sustainable Caribbean thing at one time. I don't know what has happened to that. That was used, you could stamp your products with. And then, of course, you need, for a lot of these industries, you need backup information on how it is. For instance, if you're making something, you can preserve it. What are acceptable things for finishes? What are acceptable things for if you have to use pesticides and so on? And this should not be something you have to delve for. There should be websites that are available for this as already information. You know, so what I'm saying is that there's a whole kind of horse and pony that has to be put together, that for you to be able to move this cart along, that information should be created, available, accessible. So should money. And ideas, you could have people say they have an idea. It would be great if you could go to some place that could help you to develop that idea, or suggest to you, you know, what is good and what is, you know, makes no sense and so on. But I mean, it is true to say that even in the failure of ideas, people learn. So you don't want to be so prescriptive that there is none of this. We used to do fabulous work with batik, tie-dye, all of those things were with remember Sonata cotton, which was highly sought after, for all that it appeared at the time to be a little nuts. But there are really ways in which we are going to have to try and work more assiduously, and I think with the government, the state, to try and develop a more user-friendly approach if we are going to really make these industries, or these possible industries, and certainly the sustainable livelihood for people who could be who are producing or would like to produce or are capable of producing items for sale and for you know, just some things you don't even have to sell, just to have it out there alone is inspirational. Is inspirational. I just wanted to say, the other day, a friend came in, Guyanese, came from abroad and was looking for two things, came to me in great shock. Could not find anywhere in Guyana a publication of the songs of Guyana or any poetry books of Martin Carter. Well, we can make a long list of what is not available. But why not?
Lucky for us, we now have UG Press, so maybe they can, seeing the need, could fill it.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that, and maybe Paloma, it's something that you could earn money from, is if those are things, they must be in the public domain by now, and therefore are not restricted by copyright, or even if they have the royalty on them, that this would be something that would be very good. You know, the whole Caribbean Press idea that had come into being was so important. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done. I certainly have hope, if I'm going to say, that to set up a center at an small industrial level for creativity, design, and sustainability based around non-timber forest products and all the things that could come along with that. Because, you know, a symbol, the making of anything that has to do with forest-based products means that there is a possibility of weaving, of picking sustainably, of dyes, you know, of ways in which machines could be used, which in people in villages, you know how hard it is, for instance, in Guyana to find some people to do upholstery. I mean, these are lots of important skills in this environment in particular, where you are going to be putting up a lot more commercial and residential buildings. I see that Unicommerce is going to bring in a 25 billion, whatever it is, thing. You know, how much of that is going to be dedicated to local products? They do buy local products, but you know, you can have the space, but if we're not in a position to supply, then we can't make the argument that they're buying it. And this is something that should be really important to at the trade ministry. and the other areas in the economy. So again, the manufacturing, the Chamber of Commerce and so on. So I think that we have to do a lot more work. I just want to say again, this is like cyclical.
Yeah,
You know,
we
every
keep restarting the wheel.
generation. Huh?
We keep
Right.
restarting the wheel.
This
So
is
I want to open up the floor to
good.
our
We have
audience.
people now?
Yes, we have some people.
Okay.
And for those, if you have a question, I'd like to ask you to raise your hand so that I can recognize you and give you the floor. But I wanted to point out that in 2008, the COSOD, which is the CARICOM Ministers meeting, they put together a task force to develop structures around the cultural industries, and they produced a number of strategies. And then in 2022, like I said before, they launched Creative Caribbean, and on the Creative Caribbean, there are two parts. So there's one where they fund producers, but then there's another where they're actually funding the enabling environment for the creative industries. And under that, they have visual literacy and performing arts, national artist registries, data intelligence. There's a cultural policy development, national implementation plans, draft legislation, and institutional strengthening. Now, this was done last year, so I'm hoping that we see some sort of fruit bearing, which is sustainable from something like this. One of the things I really liked about CARIFESTA was the influx of artists and producers from other territories coming together. And one of the things I hoped that we could have done was to have some more interaction, more street interactions with the artists, so that ordinary people can see how things are created and to gain inspiration from other people, from persons coming from different countries. And Paloma touched on it slightly, but I do think that maybe we could increase the spirit of competitiveness if we were to have maybe competitions or exhibitions that happen in each territory, that people would, from all the other territories would go to exhibit and compete. And I'm thinking that maybe if we have one here for furniture, Trinidad has it for wire bending or costume making. Somebody else has it for leather goods, and somebody has it for pottery, etc. As a Caribbean, that we will not only spur innovation, but we lift the creativity and really be able to tell our stories in really new and different ways. But what are your thoughts on that?
I assume you're speaking to the audience.
I am. Mr. Hines, good evening.
Good evening, Chair. And how are you? Good evening, all.
I am well. What would be your contribution to increasing women's entrepreneurship to the creative industries? Do you think our environment is enabling enough?
Well, we don't have a history of being enabling, period.
dear.
So a lot of this has generally been, any advance in this area has generally been despite the environment. I can only speak from my experience, where I am more on the tech side. So when it comes to the creatives, I see more the animation, I see the digital fabrication and stuff like that. And I think while we are waiting patiently for CARICOM initiatives coming sometime between now and 2040, there are some things that are possible that could be done locally. And again, I've seen interest regardless of gender in the tech side of things. And it may be an entry point to begin the process from that end. And there is potential funding for that if you kind of language it a little differently and stuff, just because of what donors would like to see. So for example, somebody had come to us because they were looking at digital fabrication for how people do things like earrings and costume jewelry and stuff like that. And the idea was to use IT tools to make them a little more precise and learn to do like things like AutoCAD, something like that, or CorelDRAW, or one of those to be able to do it. Now there are some people here who already do that, which you wouldn't know, but but you just see a better product and you wonder why. And it's just because some of them have actually ventured into using the technology to make better, better jewelry, better craft in certain areas, depending on what they're doing. So it wouldn't be that difficult, I submit, to be able to begin with sessions like those and attract youngsters and young people and so on. We have always been trying to get a wider pool of animators in Guyana, and we haven't done that. We've not succeeded in that as yet, and I think it is a potential industry that could bring in a lot of money for people, especially if we get good at it. I mean, it's a very precise field, and you're going to spend some years mastering the craft in order to do, it would allow youngsters to do potentially offshore business and for large studios and things like that. And that work was always available. It's just that we have to begin to put together the structures to be able to do it. But it's just to make the point that it is not impossible to do. We just, you can just put your heads together and begin to do training, that kind of training.
Yeah. I know Paloma raised the point, actually talked about it earlier, that the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce had done some work around craft a couple of years ago, well, more than a few years ago.
Wasn't
And
only
then-
craft, music too, and film, creative industries
Right.
in general.
Yeah,
And
that
I
was
think you've done some work with CDB as well.
right.
Or
That was actually, that's when I was president. We had
Mhm.
gotten $200,000 from CDB to apply some structure to one, the music industry, and also the arts and craft people. That had mixed results, and unfortunately, politics reared its ugly head at a very local level, and it was really hard to get it off the ground. I suspect that might not happen on this go round. I think that we have kind of advanced a bit in terms of doing it, but certainly things like that are there is funding for it in certain areas where you could do those kinds of programs.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
there is one. Yes.
Thank you. Carolyn Bennett, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I do. And please forgive me if I I didn't hear things from the very beginning, but I'm just kind of going based on what I've heard so far. It's more of a question in terms of the session being about gender equality, the creative industry's contribution to gender equality. But I'm trying to figure out, is it really a gender equality issue? Because I haven't really heard anything in relation to that. So please forgive me if I missed anything earlier on. Just as the gentleman had mentioned, that it seems to be, in terms of the challenges, it's kind of across the board, regardless of gender. So I'm just kind of intrigued to kind of get an understanding of what are the real challenges or concerns based on gender equality.
Can I take that a bit? Renata?
Yes, go ahead.
You may have missed the fact that I said that the first thing that we need to do is to establish who is doing what where. Are women producing in their homes as a side thing? Are they employed, meaningfully in either within self-employed or within any such industry? And for me, the question of gender equality, in my experience, and it's a long experience, and I've run a business for a long time, is that if you provide an environment in which people are able to raise both their economic level, have predictable income, and are in a position to learn and to learn new skills and to express inherent skills or skills that they have, that it will promote the environment for women to have a more equal role and outcome. I am, wise I am, I believe that disaggregate, which is what we need to do, some data here, even if there were data, how it is disaggregated to show who is where is important. But besides that, I wouldn't personally see no need to belabor this, except to say in my entire experience of working with productive things, to working at negotiation level, and the things like for UNCTAD and trade and so on, it is important, first of all, to provide, I think, a general environment for education, for skills development, and with a deliberate capacity for women to be able to enjoy these facilities, which may mean, having resources that they can leave their children at home. It will mean that they should be paid to come. In everything that I have seen that most successful is when you pay people to learn, at least you allow them to not have to dig into meager funding to be able to learn. So if you pay them their transportation, you give them stipends, you certify people, then women will come, the entire level will be raised. And young people in particular, not to mention people who are differently abled, all of whom in my experience we have done on the ground. And as small as it may be, I think it is an example from where I sit of how, in fact, with just the kind of resource focus or the openness of entry, you can make a difference.
Thanks,
So I hope
Anna.
that helps.
Anna?
Can I share? Sorry, somebody was saying, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, yes, indeed, we did kind of veer away from the original topic that we wanted to dive deep into about, women and the creative industries and how the creative industries can help to empower them. But I think the general conversation about all of these things, training, capacity building, access to funding and finances, competitiveness, but also women, as Jocelyn was saying, have some very specific conditions and sometimes responsibilities and some very specific vulnerabilities even with regard to some of these creative industries. Because for instance, in my own, and this is a couple of years ago, many years ago, when I was working on this project for CARICOM on the professionalization of the arts or the creative industries in the region, one of the things that women would consistently say to me was their contracts, right? They would work for and be told they're going to get paid X, Y, and then the story is changing, or the changing rooms, for instance, if you were a dancer, or the floor, if you were a dancer, and a female dancer at that, that you would have to dance on. If you were a woman and had children, as Jocelyn has been saying, and you had to perform, at most times these performances are at night, what happens to your children? And that's sometimes a cost to you to actually go out and perform, and the money that you might make from that is probably sucked up in childcare, or you have to leave your children unattended or something. So there's some specific issues indeed around certainly performance and creative arts and creative industries that might be peculiar to women, or much more, or it might be that they experience these things in a particular kind of a way, and not only peculiar to women, because it happens to men as well, to males as well. But definitely all of the things that we've talked about, that enabling environment is, I think, needed for everyone in the industry, certainly in the country, in these industries in the country. Sorry, Lance, to butt in. Please go ahead.
No, I think you said some of what I was going to say. Again, this is not a new problem, and this challenge is not new. And when we tried to do the animation training, we had actually allocated a stipend for them to come and be trained. And what we ran into as well is that, despite the fact, that stipend, even though the stipend was available, it did not reduce the challenges that were mentioned as much as it should have. So a chicken and egg situation, you couldn't find more money to, and in that particular class, it was, we had about 21 students. And out of that, I think there were about 13 young women who were part of the course, doing well, quite bright. And you could have seen that with a little bit more assistance, a little bit more support, we would have been able to get them to a point. It was a year-long program, and you could have gotten them to a point where they think, but after that time, some began to drop out because the stipend simply wasn't enough to be able to deal with other expenses, daily living and stuff like that. But so certainly some adjustments could be met. There's more opportunities for remote learning for some of it. So you could look at mixed learning where they could do some work at home, and they can also come. So they could work at home 3 days a week, and then they could come for practicals 2 days a week. So it's just about, I think it is something that these things have to be done. The question is how we do it, and how creatively, pardon the pun, is to find a way to do it despite the challenges, but they have to be done.
Okay, if I may also jump in here, one of the reasons we chose the creative industries is to look at with respect to the achievement of gender equality, is that it has a high number of women already participating in this industry. The problem for women is that once their participation is fairly high, their ability to earn a sustainable living for themselves and family is sometimes not achievable. And this goes towards the challenges that exist in the industry, and one of it being that it is not as professionalized as it needs to be. There is a lack of predictable markets, and there is need for a legal framework whereby that environment is created so that people can actually make living wages from their efforts. And so that's one of the reasons we chose this topic, and one of the things that we've been discussing. So it may have seemed as though we weren't actually looking at the gender equality aspect of it, but when working with women, one tends to see that even though they're being creative, there is still that need to ensure that they can make money, not just for themselves, but because they often have care responsibility for their children and the rest of their families. So I hope that sort of answers your questions, but we're willing to entertain another question from you if you have one. But I would like to go to Alison Barkey now, who has her hand up.
Good night, everyone. Really happy to be a part of the discussion. And when we look at women, having been exposed to women in business because of where I'm employed, I can talk about how they're disadvantaged. And what we have done as members of the faith-based community, some, because I'm here not as a financial person tonight, but was invited by our bishop. We have had some talks in some of the churches, especially over on the West Coast. There was a priest who had what he called an education period, where every Sunday he invited someone to talk about a business proposal or something to that effect. And you find that people are willing, people have ideas. And as Paloma said, there are so many things people can do. And the university would have aided, especially with the start of SEBI, because I can tell you, having been in the first batch that graduated from SEBI, the exposure is good. You learn these things, but then what? Coming back to Joycelyn, you need to have a market. Where can you go to sell what you produce when you have bigger people selling the same thing and your little stuff ain't meeting it? It comes down to the financial part. And a lot would need to go through the legislative channel, because unless we can differentiate these small businesses or the persons in the creative arts industry that don't really have the big backing, because we can't say they don't have the big backing with some sort of surety, unless we can group them somewhere else so that when they need financing, they don't need to provide A, B, C, D to F. They can just provide A and B or C to get the financing, but it is not something that we can do. It is something that would have to come through from the ministerial levels. And it takes me back to that long time business place, Guy Bank, I think it was. Yes, I think it was Guy Bank that used to be able to finance persons that didn't have all that was needed and to provide some sort of capital. But I'm wondering if we can, as creative persons, as persons in the arts, maybe get into communities and have community groups, community theater groups, and start sharing information like how we would have done for HIV/AIDS, the street theater, to spread awareness. Can we spread awareness that you can do training through the programs offered by the ministry? You can go to workshops that may be available and persons may not know about, or even form a little workshop on the bottom house in a group, in a village or in a ward, because these people cannot come to town or cannot even afford the fees or the registration fees to some of these sessions. But we really need to use these people, because people in the creative arts, the theater arts, they attract attention. And God rest his soul, Henry Rodney, everybody knew Henry. And gone are the days when theater used to be serious. It used to be serious and still comical in some parts. And sometimes I wonder if, because of what we are seeing, our society is influenced in that way. I'm not saying this because I'm fond of Paloma's work, but I am familiar with it. And I have seen the significant change in theater productions over the years. So that's just my little contribution to the topic. And I do hope that we can, at some point, do some bit of collaboration and probably get together where we can sit at a table and talk about what we can do for women, because the women do look after men at times. Lance, no hard feelings, but I know that you wouldn't mind being cared for, or you know what it is like to be cared for by a nice lady. But the females must, of course, find that safe space where they can
if you care how I feel.
so that they can do for themselves and develop themselves so that they can be independent in some way, they can be stronger in mind too. So it is a start, and as Renata said, it's like you're pushing the wheel again. You're starting the wheel again, because I'm sure all of this was discussed before. That's just my bit.
Thank
Renata.
you, thank you, Allison.
Is there somebody, or can I make a comment?
Well, I wanted to make this point with Lance first, before you go into your point. No, Lance, you're at the chamber, and the chamber has been very gung-ho about local content. And we had this short discussion earlier on about what that local content should look like, particularly for persons in the creative industry. So we have these new buildings that are coming up, and coupled with the Small Business Act, about 20% procurement, going to small businesses, etc. Would there be space, or would the chamber be interested in lobbying for local content, as in the furnishings, the artwork, the painting, etc., to come from local persons, not brought in from overseas, but actually created, made here locally? And would that be something that the chamber could get behind? Because if that were to happen, then we would have, we would create the space for what we're calling predictable markets for persons in the creative industry. So it's not only for tangible items, but as Allison just talked about, in terms of getting your messaging across, using the local creatives to do that.
One of the things that was always a bit unfortunate is that every time we spoke of local content was to make sure that Exxon gave us the business, or make sure SBM gave us the business, or SIPEM gave us the business, or Halliburton Schlumberger gave us the business. And that was just because we locked in our head is that's where the money is. And to me, I don't know whether that conversation is widening, but it needs to happen to include the very things that you're talking about. But for the chamber, it is certainly something that could be presented to the chamber, but it's gonna have to be articulated. I mean, to get the chamber to wrap their head around that by themselves will take a little longer, and it may or may not be something that they're interested in. I'd like to suggest having a conversation with the Women's Chamber of Commerce. They may be an entity that would certainly be interested in looking at this. Again, you'd have to articulate it as well. So, to talk about widening local content to include a lot of this, and looking at the insertion of policy, at the government level, in particular, if simple things, if the office of the president is buying gifts for dignitaries, and I think they do it already, but one of the things to enforce is that when you're buying those gifts, they come from a local, they come from local producers. If you're doing the baskets, if the hotels are doing the baskets and things for guests when they come in, I think they try to do it, but all of that should be articulated to say that let us make an effort as much as possible and every chance we get to show local products, right? To show tax, potential tax incentives. If you're a store and you've got to focus on local product, some kind of earned income credit, there are things like that you can do to show that, because at the end of the day, some of this is business and it's hard-nosed. So you got to be able to make the case that if we go down this road, this is what it is, this is what you can benefit from, or what you can what you can get. When the government asks for certain contracts that may have a arts and craft component, the people bidding for it must get points if they include, if they include local materials, things like that. They got a couple of things that you got to start to put together to begin to show people that maybe this is something that will not only profit the target market, but also for the businesses who are participating in it as well. So as I said, I think both chambers, but I would have a talk with the women's chamber as well, because I think that is something that they can wrap their head around, and certainly work in collaboration in terms of pushing that kind of initiative, so as to make sure that there's inclusion in that regard.
Okay, thank you, Jocelyn.
Well, Lance, I'm a little disappointed to hear that you don't think that this is an equal obligation for the general chamber, man-driven. So that this should somehow be more women's work for women's work. So let me just make that point. But let us just take a little, a very simple formula. You're talking about building, let's say 1,200 or 2,000 hotel rooms in Guyana. God knows why, but let us say. Imagine if every room had 2 products made in Guyana. Just 2, maybe. What a difference it would make. And this is not rocket science. There should be a lot more. You will have 4,000 predictable items that can be over a year or 2. And these could range in all sorts of forms. So I'm just saying that, people see this as something that is really very, tedious or difficult. It is in fact very simple, right? And there should be, I believe, a rating, and this is something perhaps, Renata, that the Women's Commission can do, not only points for thing, but actually do a stamp. It says this has been good for business, good for sustainability, and good for women. Good for people and good for the planet, and good for women and good for the country, kind of stamp. So I think that in terms of making it more visible, having a frame for a critique, as well as a frame for incentivizing at the thing. But all of this, of course, comes back to developing a larger commitment amongst institutions, including the government, to raising the level of input from local producers. And I don't want to make it we can demand a special focus on women, but in fact, all local producers need this incentive now, because more and more you're going to find, as is already on the cards, that there is going to be more import. I would say that for me, I've always said, if I want people to buy my products, I must buy theirs. So wherever it is possible to buy something on the domestic market, it may cost a little bit more than importing it. I try to do that, because this is how we are going to, in fact, create mechanisms for supporting each other, and more importantly, recognizing and acknowledging each other's efforts. Because until and unless that is done, and why this is important, I think that you are going to always be playing at the back end of this. So I would say, out of maybe a conversation taken up what UNCTAD's meeting was in Barbados, what the whole Compete Caribbean and all of that has done, that we should try and develop a kind of home-based approach, taking the best out of what has come out of those outcomes, to develop a kind of, not just a wish list, but a demand list as well, of what it is that we would expect from various institutions. At one time, GBTI did that thing, WOW, Women of Worth. Those were programs, and that was very simply done. The government gave them a special tax rating for that program, so that they, in terms of their general tax, they got a discount for monies that were put into that program. These are all very simple incentives to broaden the access for producers. But this must come with, it's no point telling people to make 100 different ugly things. So you need to have the input of design and you know, technique and all of that, which means that there has to be several institutions that are going to work at that level. And may I say that I think it is important, in my experience, there are certain things in which you just have to import trainers to train. These may be guys who are abroad, who are teaching in design schools, or there may be programs with design schools who would be willing to come here and work. As we have had Parsons School of Design, Pratt, Rhode Island School of Design is now interested, because these are things that preserve trees, our approach. So I'm saying that there are many, many areas in which design networks would be willing to come and work with Guyana. In Barbados, let us bear in mind, and particularly, they have sent designers abroad. They're highly skilled and highly trained, who work in the community colleges and who work within, I forget what it's called, that whole kind of Barbados network that help producers to take products to market both locally and internationally. So they would have designers in terms of items, you would have people who would work on your website and all of that. And those are governments, largely government funded things. In Barbados, it has a wreck of economy right now. What is our excuse?
Thank you. All right, it's coming up to program time. This has been a very interesting conversation. I certainly made a fair bit of notes so that the commission has some lobbying points moving forward. We certainly take your suggestion up last if we engage with the Women's Chamber. They actually are on our list of persons to have a conversation with, but not necessarily just on the creative industries. I'd like to thank everyone for coming, but I'd especially like to thank our two main discussants, Jocelyn Dow, who's the founder of Leanna Keane Furniture, and it's a furniture company that uses, what's the word? Sustainable wood material.
Non-timber.
Non-timber. Yeah. Yes, sorry, non-timber products to make fabulous
Forest
furniture.
products, non-timber forest products.
Forest products, I stand corrected.
Right.
And my friend and colleague, Dr. Paloma, I know she's Professor Paloma Mohammed. She's here because I know her as a playwright, as a storyteller. And I know from that aspect of things, the creative industries is very dear to Paloma's heart. But now she's taken on this new role of being the master trainer for the young people of this country, and she has their education responsibilities in her hands. She's been very good input into this discussion. Lance, you popped in on the back end because of your position in the chamber, and I knew that you were the president when we were doing the creative things, the craft, looking at the craft producers for CDB. And I see that last year they produced a booklet. It's called a CII booklet on profile on Guyana. And so that's something that's a starting point for the data that we need to look at for pushing this thing forward. I know that the university can also help us with gathering data on this particular issue. So we would certainly be reaching out to you for that. But thank you very much for your input. I also want to thank the audience who've been very quiet, very attentive. Allison and Caroline, thanks for your questions. I hope that this conversation this evening has given you some food for thought. And I certainly would have hoped and liked for many more of the creatives that come on board to actually share with us their particular experiences. But I'm having interviewed many of the craft producers and artists, getting that money. I mean, it may sound crass, but really and truly, the bottom line is getting enough money to live on. And that money should be, the earning of that money should also give you space and time to be creative. And I think that's, if you ask most of the creatives, that's where they'd like to be, is to have that money where you can eat and drink and look after your family, but that it gives you time and space to be creative. And I think with that, I think you'd be saying it's, we would have been successful.
Renata, if I may make one point. Why
Yes,
do
ma'am.
we've been talking about this? We should consider what it is like to be creative in hinterland communities where women are both in the household and in the farms. And yet, you know, so many of the objects they produce for their household use, as we have done, and I would put this link, like their cassava things and so on. I've worked with designers and we've tweaked some of that for more general use, so that in fact, you can tailor niche products to women's situation, so long as they're compensated properly for it. And you recognize that in fact, some of them are doing double work, triple work in the circumstances in which they live. So the part maybe of this rollout of money to those communities that we have just heard about, maybe could be used or dedicated, I hope, in their plans that could help to improve their access to the time and the resources needed to take what they do to another level. You mentioned Rupununi Essence, and you have all those medicines from trees, and the absolutely fabulous embroidery they did, trained by Red Thread women in the beginning. So, I mean, there are products that are there, Balata stuff and so on. So that within your mandate, I hope that you can have a focus on hinterland, local and indigenous communities that are not on the coast. Because that is where a lot of the raw materials we need will exist, you know? Okay.
Right.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. This conversation could go on and on, I know, because there's so many facets of it that we have yet to touch on. You raised the issue of materials, and certainly we produce materials, but we need to really look at using the materials that we have in different ways. So that would be a subject for another conversation. But thank you, everyone, and I wish you good night.
Good night. Bye-bye. See you.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.